Thank you for joining us for Unlocking Brain Health, Sharp Again's Roadmap to a Sharper Mind. I'm Joan Vance. I'm the program coordinator, and I wanted to let you know we've turned on closed captioning. And now I'd like to introduce Carol Karp, our executive director. She has a short program update for us.
Welcome, everyone. Here at Sharp Again, our mission is to educate and empower people to take charge of their cognitive health. We do this in many ways through webinars like this one, in-person presentations, articles, resources, and a website filled with valuable information. One of the most powerful ways we support brain health is through our small group coaching program. This program provides live education and support led by a certified health coach, and groups meet on Zoom once a week for 6 weeks, focusing on 4 key lifestyle areas that we know have a major impact on cognition. And we have the
Steve, can you
power to
advance the
control.
slide?
Yes, sorry.
Sorry.
Focusing on nutrition, sleep, exercise, and stress. The full cost of the program, as you can see, is $99. Well, actually, the full cost is $450, but thanks to our donors, we're able to offer it for just $99. The next series starts on Wednesday, March 20th at 6:30 p.m. and registration's open now. If you want to learn how to keep your brain sharp, this is a great place to start. To learn more, you can also email us at info@sharpagain.org. We also have some exciting webinars coming up. On Wednesday, March 19th at noon, Dr. Penelope McDonald joins us for Sugar in Your Diet, Friend or Foe for Brain Health. We'll explore how natural sugars provide essential nutrients while processed sugars can harm your health, and most importantly, how to nourish your brain the right way. On Thursday, May 15th at noon, please join us for From Chaos to Calm, Downsizing Solutions with Jennifer Bakul, Senior Real Estate Specialist, and our own Myra Oni, Certified Health Coach and Brain Longevity Specialist, for an engaging discussion on making downsizing work for you. After today's webinar, you'll receive an email with all the program details, a recording link, and any resources that are mentioned in today's presentation. If you have any questions during the presentation, type them into the chat box and we'll answer them during the Q&A at the end of the presentation. And before we begin, a quick note. The information shared today is for educational purposes only and is not medical advice. Please consult a licensed medical professional for any health concerns. And now, it gives me great pleasure to introduce our guest speaker today, Steve Ledvina. Steve is a board-certified health and wellness coach focusing on brain health and Alzheimer's prevention. In his coaching practice, Elevate Me Coaching, he works with individuals to implement lifestyle changes to prevent dementia, maintain cognition, and improve quality of life. Steve also serves as Sharp Again's board chair. Welcome, Steve Ledvina.
Thanks, Carol. Welcome, everybody. We have a nice amount of people here, and I see some new names and some really familiar names, so welcome if this is your manyth time back, and welcome if this is your first time here. Before I jump into the roadmap, I just wanted to kind of add some weight to what Carol said about the coaching program and the webinars. Today's going to be a great introduction into the brain health world. We're going to dive, a little deep into a number of different topics, but those webinars are a great place to get a really deep dive. And that coaching program is the right place to start taking action on all of these steps. And we have the great opportunity, if you want to ask during the Q&A, that Myra Oni, one of the founders of that program and one of the coaches of the program, is here. So if you have any questions, she would be the perfect person to ask. So with that, let's jump into the roadmap. Why do we even need a roadmap? Why do we want a roadmap? Getting started can be the most difficult part of your brain health journey, or one of the difficult parts. When we're talking about getting started, it's where do you start? Which thing is the most important? What actions should you take? So we really built the roadmap with that in mind. The roadmap is the right level of information to spur action, not just knowledge for the sake of knowledge. There's a number of really good books out there. including one that Sharp again is going to be publishing later this year, but sometimes taking 10 to 20 hours to read through an information dense book can be a roadblock. And so we wanted to build a roadmap as a guide to have you hone in on your areas of focus rapidly. So this is a very actionable document. It gives you enough information to understand the different parts of your brain health, the different things that are affecting it, get enough information to really be able to start taking action, find those areas of focus, and then take deep dives from there. You kind of heard me say action 3 or 4 times there. I'm a big proponent of the idea that we really want to give enough information that we can get started and then learn along the way while we're doing. A lot of people can get frozen in that learning state. And the reality is that the areas I talked about today, there's 1,000 PhD theses out there on all this stuff. There's no end to the learning. We'll never have finished. So taking action is really important. I know we put the link in the chat, but I just want to show everybody what the roadmap looks like briefly to give you context for the presentation. So we're going to share that. First topic here is going to be, so this is the cover of the roadmap. This is the document that you'll get when you download it. Just to give you a sense of how much information there is in here. The first topic we're going to talk about is nutrition. There's 3 pages on nutrition. We're going to just cover it in a few bullet points, but there's a deep dive, a little bit of information on each of the bullet points, enough to really get you a long way. If this was all the nutrition information you learned, you could get, and you just took this and you really worked on putting it into action, you could get really, really far with just what's here. And so then, that's just the 3 pages. There's about 15 more pages after this. So that's enough. Now let's actually get to a bit of the information. Let me get back to the right. All right. So nutrition for brain health. Nutrition can be one of the most complicated topics because you've probably experienced, seeing one newspaper headline one week of this is healthy for you, and then 2 months later you say this is gonna, give you cancer. This is bad for your brain health, and that's because nutrition studies can be hard to do. They can be complex. The takeaways from them can be complex. So actually taking a step back and understanding the high level principles that you can really rely on, and it can be more useful than getting super down into the details. So what are those high level principles? We know that reducing sugar intake is good for your brain. Sugar can have really strong effects on insulin levels, insulin resistance. It's very common for just people on a standard American diet to be have high markers around sugar that might be pre-diabetes or insulin resistance. So what is one of the ways that you can really reduce sugar intake and avoid a lot of the issues that we're going to talk about in the rest of this? Just consume more fruits and vegetables, consume more whole foods. Part of consuming more whole foods is going to naturally lead you to avoid processed foods. The more we're in, the really easy guiding principle, it can be try and stay on that outside of the grocery store when you're shopping. In that produce section, in the meat and dairy section, dairy can be hit or miss, but the more you know that it's a whole food, there's less ingredients, the easier we're going to have the reducing sugar intake. And things like healthy fats will also be in there more often than not. Reducing alcohol consumption. For a long time, there was a lot of studies out there that debated on, oh, is 1 or 2 drinks healthy? Is it not? The most modern studies, it's really not up for debate anymore. There's no safe level of alcohol consumption. Every drink that we have is kind of creating long-term risk, but that just means moderate your drinking as much as you can. Everybody's going to have a different trade-off for that, but we can no longer kind of tell ourselves that 1 glass of wine is amazing for us. It's kind of like a slice of cake or something. It's not gonna kill us, but it's not that everybody should be having a glass of wine every day. And finally, there's 2 really simple steps that can go a long way, and that's just hydrating. We're often underhydrating, and so getting enough water every day can be a really powerful first step. I think Myra would attest to we've seen it in the coaching programs, see it with clients, the simple act of people starting to drink a larger amount of water every day can be really empowering, and you can see results with something that simple. And then a great tool is intermittent fasting. So a lot of studies recommend to refrain from eating overnight, like an overnight fast. So imagine if you stopped eating for 12 hours overnight, that would be 8 p.m. to 8 a.m. the next day. That's kind of like the minimum simple version of fasting. Up to 16 hours can be having increasing effects. And that can just be a really good way to do a lot of the rest of this stuff, like reducing sugar intake. It's going to help heal our hunger and satiety hormones. So that is nutrition. Next piece of this is environmental toxins. So that was all the nutrition for brain health. Think of each of these things as both risk factors, so things where doing nutrition or having toxins can cause brain health risk and cognitive decline, but also doing these things really well can be preventative. So nutrition is definitely that way. Where might we look for toxins? Toxins can be hiding in the most important place to be looking for them is kind of anywhere, anything that we're interacting with repeatedly and every day. Our food can be one of the big places, packaging for food, air and water, thinking about work and home, personal care and cosmetics. Those are all kind of the major places to look. So what would you do when you're looking for these? So simple steps you might take is like getting a water filter at home, getting air filters. You might look for like mold or get a mold test in your house. Things like personal care products that we're putting on every day, makeup, lotions, looking at the ingredient lists. The roadmap, this is one of those that's a little bit more about problem solving and diving into the details. Not every single person is going to be exposed to like the same toxin. We all have different habits. We all have different homes. We're all in different regions of the country where air quality might be an issue if you're in one area. For example, what's my big when I think of toxins, and I live in Denver, Colorado, when I think of toxins, what's my big concern? I really focus on having really good air quality and air filters in my house because we have a wildfire season here. So I know that one of my biggest factors is for a few months of the year, there's a good chance that the air is going to have smoke in it. I'm not, wearing makeup every single day. Somebody who is wearing makeup every day, that's on your skin. It can be absorbed. Looking into the ingredients in that and what you might be exposed to every single day is a really valuable step to keeping your brain healthy. Prescription medications. So this is always one we want to be really delicate about, because nobody should go off or change their prescription medications without the guidance of a doctor. And so, but medications can have strong cognitive effects. The cognitive effects can be part of the intended effect. It can be a common side effect. It can be a rare side effect. And so what's sort of this step? The best way to do this is to kind of catalog any symptoms or concerns you have. Let's say, hey, I'm worried about forgetting. I'm worried about this or that. I'm started to forget this, or I've noticed I'm a little slower at doing math. Whatever your symptoms might be, write them down and go in and have that structured, targeted conversation with your doctor and say, hey, I'm having these symptoms. I'm a little bit worried that maybe X, Y, or Z medication might be affecting this. Could this be a side effect? Could this be, something that I'm experiencing because I'm taking these other medications, or could this be a drug interaction? There is a reasonable amount of cognitive issues that can be alleviated through changing medication or being on too many medications that are interacting in a way. That's not something we can just do on our own as a lay person. Something we have to do in partnership with our doctor. But we all know how overburdened the medical system can be. There isn't necessarily always somebody who's spent the 20 minutes to look at your medication list and think, oh, could that be causing this? Or somebody who combines the medication list with cognitive symptoms and realizes, oh yeah, that could certainly be it. Let's maybe change to different medications that have a similar effect and see if things are getting better. I'm also sure some people have had the experience of a new doctor reviewing your medication list for the first time and realizing that you might still be on a medication from 5 years ago that you probably don't need to be on, or there's a newer version, or we've learned something new. So this is one area where a conversation with the doctors can be really effective. Okay, so similar to toxins, heavy metal toxicity is a big area where if you have heavy metal toxicity, the symptoms look a lot like dementia, and sort of there's like acute toxicity and more chronic toxicity. Any level, like elevated levels of these can be impacting your brain and have an effect and be part of the issue. Acute levels can have really significant cognitive symptoms. The nice thing about heavy metal toxicity is can be, if you're having cognitive symptoms, if you're worried about it, if you may even know that you are exposed to heavy metals, for example, things like mercury. You might know that you had mercury amalgam fillings that you're worried about might have been done improperly and that it could be, leaching out and getting into your system. You can get tested for, heavy metals, for mercury. Same thing with things like lead. If you know you were in a house or an environment where you would have been exposed to lead or aluminum or something, you can go get that test. So this is one of the things that if you are working with like a functional medicine doctor or someone on brain health, one of the processes, one of the steps that they will go through is to get a heavy metal toxicity test, get a test for heavy metals in the blood and urine, and see if this could be a contributing factor to cognitive symptoms. From there, the remediation of the heavy metals is kind of a straightforward, although not necessarily pleasant process. But again, this is one of those things that's very addressable, but can have a really significant cognitive effect, and that we can't really do on our own. Hormonal imbalances is kind of under a similar category of our hormones are probably the most powerful things in our body. They are really, really important to almost every body process that we have. If we have too high of levels of certain hormones, too low of levels of other hormones, it will rapidly and can have, result in significant symptoms. Some of those effects can be things like brain fog, unexplainable weight loss or gain, hair loss, high blood sugar, anxiety and irritability, exhaustion and depression. So, which hormones are we talking about? There's kind of the two, maybe three major categories of hormones that we would kind of drill in on. There's the thyroid hormones, the sex hormone. So thyroid, there's a few different types of thyroid. You can get tested for those levels. If you ask your doctor about that, if you're like feeling lethargic and things, that is a simple test to get as part of your annual visit. Same thing if with like sex hormones. So that's going to be things like estrogen and testosterone, among others. But those hormone levels can also have significant cognitive effects. And then insulin, which we talked about earlier a little bit with nutrition, but insulin sensitivity and our body's ability to manage the blood sugar in our systems over a lifetime can create chronic inflammation. If we're doing it poorly, can have other effects. All of those effects eventually will have an underlying impact on the brain. And I think we'll talk about inflammation next, because inflammation. So just to wrap up hormones before I jump off into a tangent on inflammation. Again, solving a hormone problem can be a little more complex, but getting tested for them and starting to understand what's going on is something that you can do with the help of your doctor and a blood test. So I would say environmental toxins, prescription medication, heavy metal toxicity, hormonal imbalances. These are all sort of the deeper dive, a little trickier to problem solve, probably need the help of a professional in the area of somebody like environmental toxins. That might be a mold professional. Otherwise, it's probably your doctor. Having a structured, concerned conversation about this stuff with your primary care doctor can be really helpful. But those are kind of the steps you take with the help of a professional. Now we're going to jump into inflammation, which is a little bit it can be a cause of itself, but it's also one of the ways a lot of the things we just talked about harm our brains. And then we'll jump into a number of topics that you can take action on today, which I think is the really exciting stuff. It's sort of, here's all the information. You might need to have some of these conversations with your doctor. They're a good place to get started. Really important to understand how they work. And now we want to talk about the stuff that if you walked away from today, you could start taking action right now without the help of, you don't need really the help of anybody for most of this. So inflammation from low-level infections or other areas. So there's several different areas where we're talking about low-level infections. Oral infections, it might seem pretty simple. Our mouth is close to our brain, and it turns out that infections and poor, oral hygiene issues have many studies that show a link between different oral health conditions and our cognitive health. Those can be, if it's an acute infection, it can have an acute cognitive. So, something where you might need to be going on antibiotics, you'll have cognitive symptoms from that. But the long-term poor oral hygiene or oral health issues create a heightened risk of dementia and cognitive decline. So making sure that we keep the habit up of maintaining oral health will reduce our risk for any cognitive issues and increase our chances of preventing those. Urinary tract infections can cause a huge inflammatory response that spans the whole body and has really significant cognitive issues. It's actually one of the things that, similar to many of the other stuff we just talked about, it's one of those things where when somebody's having cognitive issues, you want to see if there might be a UTI issue as one of your first steps, because it's very common that people who might be in the age bracket to start experiencing cognitive decline or early dementia symptoms might also be at risk for urinary tract infections, and those UTIs can really mimic the symptoms of dementia. Food sensitivities and allergies. This is kind of the opposite end of the spectrum from something like a UTI when we're talking inflammation. If we're regularly eating foods that are creating a low-level inflammatory response, they can that low level, but long-term, decades long in some cases, years long in others, inflammatory response creates an aggregated harm to our brains. It's kind of like, getting 1,000 paper cuts. One, not a big deal, but 1,000, that starts to be a big deal. So food sensitivities and allergies, paying attention to those, removing things that we're sensitive to, removing allergens, those can all be really powerful steps. How to minimize, simple steps like drinking plenty of water, paying attention to digestive issues. If you've tested positive to inflammatory markers, so I will say, like, things like chronic inflammation, you might get some pushback at the doctor. It's because it's harder to test for those. I've personally had that conversation with some of my doctors, and I think a functional medicine doctor will be really effective at having that conversation. Chronic inflammation is a bit more of a long-term problem-solving issue, and most of our inflammation tests are just sort of, and inflammation in general, like, it's not a strong enough signal. If you test high for inflammation, the doctor doesn't necessarily know what to do with that, because it might be one event of 30 different things that could be causing that inflammation. You might have a small infection at that moment, and that's why something like your high sensitivity C-reactive protein test is high. So that's like one of the common tests for inflammation. Or you might have something like a more chronic infection or a more chronic inflammation issue that would be causing something like that to be high. So that can be a more difficult conversation, but one worth having if you're worried about it, particularly if you have copies of ApoE4. For anybody who is aware of that, that's one of the genetic risk factors that increases your chances of developing dementia. That genetic risk factor is it's actually a protective response that our bodies developed to have a larger inflammatory response to kill bacteria and other pathogens. But in a modern context, it can make us more sensitive and have a higher inflammatory response to just everyday things. I have a copy of that, and I pay a little more attention to inflammation as a result. All right. That's the finishing of all the really dense stuff. If you're interested in any of those, definitely download the roadmap. I gave the high-level overview. Just reading the 1 or 2 pages on each of those issues can be, really clarify things and be helpful. And then if you want to go a step further than that, we have, just go to our YouTube page. If you go to YouTube and just type in Sharp Again, you'll see our channel. And there is an expert webinar from the past couple of years on every single one of those topics. Just scroll through, you'll be able to find them if you want sort of this kind of information. And otherwise, you know, reach out to us if you would like to have any, if you need help being directed. We have a good network of professionals and other resources. So you can take a deep breath. So everything else we're going to talk about is stuff you know about. It's not going to be brand new, but it is going to be as, if not more important than the things we just talked about. And so this one slide right here, physical activity, mental stimulation, social interaction, this is like such a massive part of our brain health. This is sort of more prevention, but having really strong fitness regimen, staying mentally active, having a robust and supportive social network, very protective, going to help keep your brain healthy. And on the contrary, having minimal exercise, not necessarily keeping our body active, not using our brain in new and novel ways, and loneliness can have a damaging effect to our brain. So what are we talking about when we talk about exercise? We want to increase our movement during the day. That's just number one. If you're not moving a lot, if you don't do anything that you can think of and say, oh, I got exercise today, just start walking, start moving, start dancing. Even something as simple as if you're watching TV, having a couple 2-pound weights nearby to just get the heart rate up, build some muscle. I think the overarching thing, the most important thing with exercise is to find something that brings you joy and that you will keep doing. Now, that won't always start right away. Sometimes you have to get a little bit into exercise, get used to it, so that it's not as challenging to find the joy. But the key is to do whatever it is you choose consistently. In an ideal world, what that consistent exercise looks like is a few, 2 to 3 to 4 cardio sessions a week for 20 minutes or more. We want to get our heart rate up. That doesn't have to be, you don't have to be an Olympic marathoner. It just has to be something that gets your heart rate up. And that can be something as simple as, that could be something like running, biking, jogging, but it can also be something like dancing. It can be gardening. If you're doing vigorous gardening work, really anything that's going to make it so that you're out of breath and that you're doing for half an hour can be a really effective exercise session. Beyond that cardio, we want to be building and maintaining muscle. We want to be strong. The having muscle and building muscle can have some really beneficial effects to your overall health, your overall body, your heart health, but also as a result, your brain health. And exercise is one of those areas, along with that nutrition, where it's really clear how much our brain health is affected by all the other areas of health. Our brains are really sensitive, so having really good cardiovascular health, really good nutritional health goes a long way. And then the final piece of exercise is sort of stability and flexibility. We want to be able to have confidence moving through the world, doing our everyday activities. We want to be strong on our feet. We want, and we have to maintain that by doing things like yoga or Tai Chi or, something like pickleball. If that's, a lot of people love that these days. Like, that's building stability and flexibility. One of the biggest risk factors as we age to our brain health is a significant fall. Because if we have a significant fall and we break something that reduces our mobility, all of a sudden, all the healthy stuff just gets a lot harder. It's harder to eat healthy and exercise and socialize overnight, and it's stressful and it's painful. So the more we can mitigate that risk, the better. The way to mitigate that is by strength training and stability flexibility training. The last thing, because I think everybody has thought of and looked at exercise many times, is every doctor I've ever heard talk about exercise and brain health, or exercise and longevity, or exercise and overall health says something along the lines of, if you're looking or waiting for that miracle drug, it's exercise. We already have it. We'll never be able to build a pill or create a solution or a treatment that is as effective for our health as exercise. So if you're not exercising, start simple, start joyful, but definitely start. Challenging our brain, really the exact same principles as exercise. Our brains grow or shrink depending on how much we're using them to keep different brain parts active, and are we learning new things? There's a lot of really valuable brain chemicals, brain maintenance processes that occur when we're challenging our brains, when we're learning a new thing. And what does that look like? What does it feel like? How would I know that I'm exercising my brain? One, just doing more than the basics, doing more than just like watching TV is kind of the minimum of exercising your brain. Socialization, which I'll talk about next, huge exercise for our brain. Keeping that active, super important. A huge part of our brain is dedicated to social interaction. So keeping that as a part of our life is valuable. But I think we know that feeling in our brain when we're trying something new, when we're trying a new habit, or when we're like pulling an old hobby or skill back into our life. Like if you used to play guitar and you stopped and you want to play it again, it can take a little bit to like knock the rust off that skill, or a language, or anything that you're doing. We can feel sort of, ooh, this is a little more difficult. This is kind of a hard thing I'm doing. I'm taking all my energy. I'm taking all my focus. We want to seek that feeling out. I named a few things. Taking a course with a friend is a good example. Learning a new language, just overall being curious. Going and doing a cooking class. Something like dancing is a great way to combine all three of these. So just doing new things can be really helpful. Socialization can come in the form of big or small interactions. So on the big side, having a robust network, having family, friends, coworkers, like people that you interact with, that you have a strong relationship with, is a really important, valuable part of keeping our brains healthy. So if you don't have certain parts of that in your life, seeking out a club or a volunteer situation to stay active, to maintain and build relationships, to nurture new and old friendships is a good step to consider. If you want to up the socialization in your life, the studies show that something as simple as that 30-second conversation with the barista at the coffee shop, or smiling and saying hi on the streets to someone, can reduce any of the like loneliness effects. It can bring sort of the good side of socialization back in relatively quickly. So valuing those smaller interactions, feeling like you're in a community, feeling a little less anonymous by just having those small conversations, can have a positive effect on our brains. All right. So those are, I spent a while on that, but like staying active, staying stimulated, staying social, really valuable. Along similar lines is prolonged stress. So this is kind of another piece of our everyday lives that acute stress can, make us a little foggy or make us not think sharp. If we're in an emergency, if we're in a certain time, let's say, you know, a couple months or something where things are really hard, that can create a short-term effect of making it harder for us to think. The increased cortisol levels can have cognitive symptoms. We're less worried about that because there's an end date. We're worried about the type of stress, and it might be high levels of stress, or it might be low, you know, more low levels of stress, but the stress that lasts months or years can add up and have an aggregate effect on our brains. We want to look at kind of two different ways of minimizing or managing stress. So there's kind of the stress that we can remove from our life, and that's more of a problem-solving exercise. How do we make our life less stressful structurally? Everybody's stressor is going to look a little different. Maybe it's work stress or family stress or financial stress, or stress with the world. To the degree that we can, you know, remove the stress from our life, those are the right steps to take in a healthy way. But then most often when you have prolonged stress, it's something we can't remove from our life. So how do we manage stress when it's immovable, it's unsolvable? It might be unsolvable in a short term, like you can handle it in 6 months, but today you're just going to have to buckle down and realize it's a part of our life for 6 months. These are the tools that we use. So things like deep breathing, practicing yoga and meditation. There's a really powerful type of meditation that has strong research for our brain health called Kirtan Kriya. If you're interested in that, we have it on our YouTube channel. It's also taught as part of our coaching program. We can do things as simple as spending time in nature. A few hours in nature a week, a few days in nature a month, you know, a day in nature a month, a few days in nature a year can have a huge health effect. And if you think of, you know, the healthy people in your life, I have found that looking around, often the people who have the most balanced mental health find a way into nature in some way. You know, that might be just going for a walk in your local park, and you'll say, oh, my friend goes for a walk every day in their park. Or it might be somebody who goes fishing or camping or something, but people often find a way into nature. The key is here to find the piece of stress management that works for you, and to not beat yourself up over it and create more stress. I have encountered plenty of people who start doing yoga, start doing meditation, and it's now a new obligation. Now they have one more obligation on top of their stress, and it's just creating more stress. You might find that in the first day or two or week where you're building a new habit. It's kind of inherently a little bit more mentally taxing, but what we don't want to do is to create more stress than we need. All right. Sleep and breathing. So like, we don't have a choice to do these things. We often take them for granted. They are some of the most important parts of our daily life, and therefore our health. I'll start with sleep. We sleep every day. Hopefully we sleep for about 8 hours every day. The recommended amount is between 7 and 9 hours of sleep. The key there is, despite decades of kind of hustle culture suggesting that it's like some ideal to sleep for 5 hours a night and that's how you get an extra whatever, no. The getting that 7 to 9 hours is super important for our long-term health. It creates crisper, clearer cognition today, and it prolongs our cognitive health over the long term. To get that 7 hours of sleep, we can't necessarily just be in bed for 7 hours. Most of us spend some time falling asleep. Most of us spend some time waking up and some time waking up throughout the night. For example, I myself know that I have to be in bed for about 8 hours and 15 minutes in order to just get that minimum 7 hours of sleep. If you're worried about sleep, doing something simple like keeping a sleep journal for a couple weeks, what time did I go to bed? What time did I wake up? How did I feel? Just those 3 questions for a few weeks. There's also any number of sleep trackers out there that are helpful. I know a favorite of many in the Sharp Again ecosystem, love the Aura Ring. I have used it in the past and it can be really effective. Breathing, on the other hand, you can tell me I was just talking so fast that I'm a little out of breath. We breathe something like 15 times every minute over our lifetime. That's millions of breaths. It's one of the most important things we do. Believe it or not, everybody doesn't just naturally breathe healthfully, particularly while we're sleeping. So if you think you might have sleep apnea, that is one of the most important risk factors for cardio health, and therefore one of the most important risk factors for brain health over time. When we have sleep apnea, our breathing gets interrupted many times an hour. And so stopping breathing that frequently deprives our brains and bodies of oxygen and can create any number of issues over that 8 hours of sleep we're sleeping every night. If your breathing is interrupted 100 times a night over the course of a year, it's going to have a significant effect on your body. So getting sleep and breathing problems corrected is a really, really important step. Other than that, there's some really interesting studies that show that because our food has just become less tough, we chew less, and chewing less has resulted in more our jaws and our airways being less expanded over the last several hundred years. And so on average, our airways are more compact than they have been historically, which is why many of us have different breathing issues. So paying attention to breathing. Do you feel like you can breathe well during exercise? Are you snoring a lot at night? Really, really valuable. Something to pay attention to, something to address. Getting a sleep study is an easy first step to that. You can usually do an at-home sleep study through your primary care doctor. It comes in the mail, takes 1 or 2 nights. I really recommend it. Physical and emotional trauma. It's another one of these pieces that creates a risk factor for our brain health. Physical trauma, things like concussions, traumatic brain injuries, those come from kind of like physical events, car accidents, falls, sports injuries. They can come in the big and the small. And a car accident, that's obvious. I hit my head, I got a concussion, or something, a big concussion, but that can also be small. If you're doing a sport where your head is repeatedly hit, many of us are probably familiar with the research around the NFL that people whose heads are getting repeatedly hit, but even if it's not a concussion, there is still an effect there. So that traumatic brain injuries is one of those where we really want to avoid them as much as possible. And if we have them, explore means of treatment. Similarly, emotional trauma, things like adverse childhood experiences. That's going to be something like physical and emotional abuse, PTSD, and honestly, a step away from that, more broadly, just mental health issues, the research on depression, anxiety, those sorts of things, and long-term brain health. Any untreated mental health issue, especially trauma, creates a long-term risk factor for our brain health. So hard to prevent those things. It's not ever anyone's fault that they happened, but it's something that we want to treat if we know it does happen and not just let go. Okay, I know that was a lot. I gave, this was kind of a mile wide and an inch deep. The roadmap is deep enough that you could make months of action just based on that. I really recommend you downloading it. You already have the link for that. It's going to be in the follow-up email. And now we have about 7 minutes for questions. And I haven't been watching the chat to even know if there are some. Okay.
I don't see any in the chat, but if you have a question, you can just unmute yourself and ask away if you like. Excuse me.
Yeah, and a question can even be an area that you just want us to talk about more. We also have Myra on, who's
Hey, Steve, when we talk about hydration, is it just that we should drink more water? Do other liquids suffice?
depends on the liquid. In general, we don't want to be drinking liquids that are like high in sugar. Having certain amounts of electrolytes can be helpful. We don't,
Teas.
yeah, things like there's benefits to many liquids. That said, a healthy hydration regimen will be predominantly water. Like I don't, Myra, would you talk about this all the time? Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I would say that predominantly it would be water would be the healthiest liquid. A lot of people like to drink, they like to drink water with like a little squeeze of lemon or lime in it.
Yeah.
And that, and so it gives a little bit of flavor. We have a lot of questions about, is it okay to drink like sparkling water?
Yeah.
And it seems like sparkling water is fine unless it gives you digestive issues. So that's another way that you can vary your liquid. Also, non-caffeinated herbal teas
Right.
is another way you can hydrate. Yeah.
Teas are a good one because they have all sorts of other benefits. The other compounds in the tea have valuable effects for our health and brain. Carbonation is definitely a way to make things more interesting. The only caveat beyond the digestive issues that I might mention to carbonation is teeth. Our teeth, the carbonation in the teeth can, if you're drinking only carbonated beverages all day, every day, it can weaken the enamel. So it's something you want to watch out if you're prone to that, or if your doctor has given you that feedback at some point, your dentist. I mean, all right.
There is a question in the chat box. Do you have information on cranial hypertension and brain health? Dealing with constant pain seems like it would be taxing on the brain.
I don't have specific information on cranial hypertension, but I agree with your assessment that that chronic pain is definitely a associated with many of the risk factors for brain health. For example, prolonged stress, that sort of thing, increased cortisol. So I think that seems reasonable. Also, high blood pressure anywhere is associated with risk factors, is a risk factor for brain. So I imagine, hypertension in the brain would follow is similar. Thanks for the question.
I don't really know much about this cranial hypertension. I was just reading a little bit about it online when I saw this question. And I don't know it. I know if you're familiar with craniosacral therapy, is something that might possibly be helpful for that. I'm just like spitballing this because I don't really know, but kind of putting the two pieces of information together, that type of therapy might be helpful. And dealing with constant pain of any type, yeah, is very taxing. And a resource that I could recommend also is a website called Curable, Curable. And they actually work with helping people deal with chronic pain issues in a not using medication prescriptions, but using other types of therapies to help relieve pain. So those are a couple of resources that might help. Yeah,
Yeah.
you're welcome.
Just to add one, meditation is a good place to start. There's a lot of pain studies that show the anticipation of the pain. Meditation is not going to remove your pain, but it can reduce your pain by a significant amount. That our cognitive anticipation of the pain is a significant part of the experience of pain. All right. Maybe time for one more question if we have one. Otherwise,
I added the link to Curable Health in the chat box.
awesome.
Great, thank you.
I guess I'll just take 30 seconds, unless somebody has a question, to kind of pitch that coaching program again. I think you saw today, there's so much here. In sorting through what's here and starting to take action it can be a little overwhelming, and having a community and sort of a supportive guide and expert in our coaches can just be such a valuable part of your journey. So if you or a loved one are worried about your cognitive health long term, people who attend our programs are everywhere from, hey, I'm just worried about my cognitive health. My mom, dad, sister, brother has dementia. I want to prevent it for myself, to, hey, I'm experiencing early kind of symptoms. I notice my cognition is slowing down. So anybody in those ranges is a wonderful fit. In the community, the other participants, the coaches, they're just all an incredible resource. And for $99, you really can't find a better value anywhere in the health world. So
Yeah, Steve, I just wanted to say on top of that this is a lot of information here. And in the coaching program, we really focus, as Carol said in the beginning, on nutrition, stress, exercise, and sleep, because it's a short program, it's 6 sessions, you can't take all this information in and actually apply it. So we focus on those 4 areas. We have a workbook, we have videos, and the sessions are really coaching. So they are, you basically choose someplace, a habit you want to change, and know when you want to start working on, and we support you in doing that. So it's very focused in small doable steps, and that actually can launch you into moving into other healthy habits. You learn how to do that, and you learn how to do it, and you have support doing it. So, it's not like you have to learn all of this complex information. It's very focused and very action oriented. So.
Exactly. I saw Deborah's comment. It kind of replied with a single word already, but chronic stress, long-term stress, this kind of goes for many of the other things we talked about today. Can my brain recover? Our brains are incredibly resilient, especially from something like chronic stress. The harms, while they may be significant sometimes, are usually not permanent. It can take a lot of effort sometimes to heal our brains. It's definitely not always a simple task, but it's possible. I've seen it. Many people have experienced it. And yeah, there's hope. The best time to start is now. The best time to start managing chronic stress is today or tomorrow. I wouldn't feel hopeless if any of the things we talked about today are a part of your life or a part of your health right now. We talk about them because they are changeable, and you can take action to address them. And if you address them, things will be better.
Yeah, we actually had a discussion about this in the group that's currently running yesterday. We are in the stress module, and we had a a big discussion about this because someone in the group has long-term chronic stress, and we had a really good discussion about it. And in the course of the discussion, you know, a lot of resources came up that different people had, and the person who asked this question, I think, really felt very supported and had a couple of avenues to look into. So that was a good conversation and very, very productive. And yes, there are ways that you can recover from long-term stress, and we can show you where that is. So.
All right, just looking at the time.
Well,
I have to go. Thank you everyone for being here. It was wonderful to spend this time with you. I'm glad everyone's taking the opportunity to move forward their brain health, or maybe learn something to help a loved one move theirs forward. And we hope to see you at a coaching program or a webinar sometime soon.
thank you so much, Steve. I'm going to
Thank
stop
you.
the recording.
Perfect.